Good Tuesday morning. I'm Zinklea Samoa in for Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for joining us right now on Morning News Now. Relieved of duty. Fallout from the fatal beating of Tyre Nichols grows this morning. 2 more police officers removed from duty, and now 3 of the city's EMTs are also fired in the wake of Nichols' death. We've got the very latest from Memphis as Nichols' friends and family prepare to gather to say their final goodbyes. And we're looking at more wild weather this morning as rain, sleet, and snow pounds the south with frigid temperatures to follow. From Texas to Tennessee, more than 30 million people are under winter weather alerts, making for a treacherous morning commute. We're following this massive storm's latest track. Also this morning, new developments in that deadly movie set shooting involving actor Alec Baldwin. Later today, a New Mexico district attorney is set to formally file charges against Baldwin and the on-set armorer for the movie Rust. We'll dig into what happens next. And Miracle in the Mountains will bring you an incredible story of survival this morning. A Colorado woman's life-changing 200-foot fall and the team of Good Samaritans who stepped in to save a stranger's life. Really just an incredible story.
Truly, even seeing her with the neck brace.
I know, absolutely. We'll bring you that later this hour. We begin, though, this morning with the latest developments in the Tyree Nichols investigation.
That's right. This morning, there's more fallout following the release of that graphic video and multiple videos last week showing Nichols' brutal beating. Yesterday, the Memphis Police Department announced that 2 more officers have been relieved of duty. We know the name of one of those officers, Preston Hemphill. Hemphill's lawyer released a statement yesterday saying he was, quote, never present at the second scene, and he is cooperating with officials in this investigation. And now the Memphis Fire Department says 3 of its employees who responded to Nichols' beating have been fired following an internal investigation. Meanwhile, last night, supporters gathered for prayer in a vigil at the intersection of where Tyree was brutally beaten following a traffic stop. His stepfather spoke about the pain the family is going through.
We know that my son died right here was heartbreaking. We know that my son was calling out my wife's name, and we was not able to hear him, to help him. It's devastating.
NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber joins us now from Memphis with the latest in the investigation. Good morning, Ellison. So we have to note that the 2 latest officers who were relieved of duty were not fired or charged. What do we know about Preston, and why are we just now hearing the police department say he was involved?
Right now, these 2, we only know the name of one of them. Officer Preston Hemphill, the 7th officer relieved of duty, has not yet been named, at least publicly, though that is something that Tyree Nichols' family's attorneys, as well as community activists, are calling for. In terms of this officer, the 6th officer, Preston Hemphill, we know that he was hired by Memphis Police Department in 2018. The first body camera footage that was released on Friday night, what was identified, titled as Video 1, that moment when you see the officers first going up to Tyree Nichols' car and pulling him out, that video was from Preston Hemphill's body camera footage. We know that because that's what the Memphis Police Department has said, as well as his attorney. In terms of why we're just now getting this name, when NBC News spoke to a spokesperson for the Memphis Police Department yesterday, they said that they did not publicly release his name when they released the names of the other 5 officers because he had not been fired. They said that they only released the names of those 5 who had been fired and also subsequently charged. But in the case of the 6th officer, Preston Hemphill, and now also it appears the 7th officer, they weren't fired, rather they were relieved of duty. When asked specifically by NBC News if Officer Hemphill was on paid or unpaid leave, the spokesperson did not specify. But then in subsequent statements, they have acknowledged that he was present at the first scene, also that he deployed a taser. They are saying this, that investigators with the Memphis Police Department's internal affairs prioritized interviewing officers and witnesses related to the second scene first, where the most egregious aspects of the incident occurred. They say that, again, that he was not at that second scene, so that's why they're saying they've been, I guess, in some people's views, a little slower with releasing this information, with conducting this investigation. That being said, They are saying that there could be additional charges, that we should expect to see more personnel moves in the coming days. But for a lot of people, Zincle, there's great frustration that this person was not identified sooner. And I have to note that a big reason why his name really started to come up in the last 36 hours was because of local community activists, Black women who were on Twitter saying, hey, there's this name of an officer in one of the initial affidavits that's mentioned, and they say he used the taser at the scene. Why don't we know anything about this guy? Then from that, you had that group pressuring those activists, as well as some other local progressive outlets like the Tennessee Holler, that then led to the Memphis Police Department publicly identifying this individual. Tyree Nichols, his family, their attorneys, they are calling for this officer to be immediately fired and saying that they want to see more transparency from the Memphis Police Department, and they want all audio recordings to be released immediately. Zincle.
I mean, really important details there, Ellison, especially also about the community bringing that information forward. Ellison, I know we also know the Memphis Fire Department fired 3 employees after an investigation into their actions that night. What were the findings of that investigation?
Yeah, so they say these employees, 2 of them EMTs, one of them the driver of the fire department vehicle that arrived on scene initially, that they showed up and they responded based on what the initial call was for, which was that a individual had been pepper sprayed. They say they relied on that initial information and details and descriptions from officers at the scene rather than doing their own patient assessment on the ground. They say that essentially they failed to follow the basic protocols of their department. It took quite a while for an ambulance to actually arrive on scene, and there have been questions about that. It was over 20 minutes afterwards. These 3 called for an ambulance, but again, they were basing all of their moves, according to the fire department, on just the initial description that this individual was pepper sprayed, when clearly what we've seen in the videos, what we know happened after, he had much more severe injuries that needed attention, and he needed help much quicker than he got it. Zincle.
Really important details in a case that has everyone's attention. Allison Barber, thank you so much.
A conversation about the death of Tyree Nichols reached Capitol Hill last night. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Dick Durbin, just one of many politicians who urged his colleagues to move on police reform, saying in part, quote, it's time for members of the Senate to bridge our differences and pass a policing reform so that Tyree Nichols' death will not have been in vain. Ali Vitale joins us now from Washington, D.C. on this. Ali, good morning. So last night was, of course, not the first time that police reform has been discussed on the Senate floor. We've actually seen Senators Tim Scott and Cory Booker spearhead some bipartisan efforts around it in the past. First, I want to play a little bit of what Tim Scott had to say last night.
I take the issue of policing in America seriously. I want our body to see it not as an issue of Republicans versus Democrats, but as good people standing in the gap, elected to do a job.
Ali, give us some context here around what this typically looks like when it comes to a bipartisan effort here. What does it look like when we're trying to make police reform a bipartisan issue?
Well, Savannah, we know what it looked like because we watched these talks come together and then fall apart in the fall of 2021, not that long ago. And they were between Senator Tim Scott on the Republican side, who you saw on your screen just there, and Senator Cory Booker leading on the Democratic side. One of the main senators, Senator Dick Durbin, yesterday urged these lawmakers to get back to the negotiating table and see if they could find common ground, or, as Democrats in the White House want, if there's a way that they could push forward on the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which had previously passed the Democratic-controlled House, but stalled out in the Senate because of those ongoing negotiations. The optimism for this actually coming to fruition, though, Savannah, is pretty low, especially because even if these 2 sides on the Senate did come back to the negotiating table, the House realities have changed a lot. Republicans now control that chamber, and there is not a clamoring for action there.
Ali, I want to ask you about a couple other pieces of news here. First, we're seeing push from both sides of the aisle to call for a briefing on the various classified documents cases that have popped up recently. Do we think that's something that could actually happen soon?
Well, look, they're trying for it, and it's not just Republicans on the Senate side. It is Republicans and Democrats alike. We've seen the Senate Intel Committee marching in lockstep. Last week, they had a briefing with the Director of National Intelligence. No one was happy coming out of that briefing. They felt that they were being stonewalled. In Senator Rubio's words, he said that the DOJ was giving them the Heisman because the Director of National Intelligence said that while the DOJ special counsel investigations are going on, they're going to be pretty hamstrung in terms of what they can share. That is not a palatable answer to either party on the Senate side on this. So we're seeing them continue to push forward, trying to talk to the DOJ, trying to say that this is their job as the Intel Committee, is to get a sense of just what's in these documents, not just in the Trump case, though they have been asking that long, but also in the cases of President Biden and former Vice President Mike Pence.
Allie, quickly, also before I let you go, debt ceiling, another hot issue. The president is expected to meet with Speaker McCarthy tomorrow. Yeah, debt ceiling, hot issue. Never thought I'd say that. Do you think we'll get any concrete results from this meeting, Allie?
Well, look, it's a start. And yeah, this might be the thing that makes every American think that the debt ceiling is as important as it is. I don't know that we'll ever make the debt ceiling sexy, but this is something that could have truly catastrophic results on the American economy if the U.S. were to default on its debt. It's never happened before, and that's why we're seeing these negotiations start so early. This is probably not going to become a true pinch point until June. That's the date that the Treasury Department has put on the map for its so-called X date, when they would basically stop being able to pay their bills. We're watching Congress come together and try to start these negotiations at an early point. But here's the thing, Savannah. Democrats in the White House say this shouldn't be a negotiation at all. And then on the Republican side of this, you're going to see Speaker McCarthy leading the negotiating dynamics, because it's his House, his conference, that's going to be harder to wrangle on a deal than on the Senate side of this. And Mitch McConnell has basically said as much, too, in recent days.
Allie, we're going to have to see if they'll raise the roof. You know what I'm saying? This is what happens when I get off my sleep schedule and I'm all over the place anchoring. Allie Vitale, thank you so much. Mwah, see you soon.
I love it.
Now, millions of Americans are bracing for a dangerous storm that's set to bring a triple weather threat of ice, snow, and sleet to states from Texas to West Virginia. So far, 48 million people are under winter weather alerts for this storm, with states like Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas already feeling the impact of it. According to the National Weather Service, these severe conditions could cause chaos on the roads. We have our meteorologist, Angie Lastman, keeping us up to date on the latest weather developments. But first, let's go to Maggie Vespa, who is live in the Windy City for us this morning. Maggie, good morning. So what is the situation looking like where you are? How are conditions in Chicago?
Savannah, simply put, it's physically painful to be outside here, and the proof here is in our thermometer. -2 degrees this morning. -2, just under the zero there. With the wind chill, it feels like -7, -8. So being out here is definitely treacherous, although we have, because Chicagoans are a different breed, seen people jogging in this weather. So go figure. But yeah, it's really bottoming out here in that below zero territory, and definitely, you know, dicey stuff for the roads and you know, the typical warnings that we tend to give out as the system makes its way across the country. Savannah.
And Maggie, it's Zinkley here. Treacherous sounds right when you're describing this weather. I know officials are also saying it may be the coldest temperatures since Christmas. National Weather Service saying highs are in the 16-degree range, which just sounds kind of painful. So how much colder is it expected to get? Will there be areas where people can go to get out of the cold?
So mercifully, guys, thankfully, this seems to be about where it's bottoming out here in Chicago. These overnight lows that are dipping just below zero. Again, the -2. I'll just hold this up for more street cred. The city of Chicago does have a well-oiled machine of getting people into warming shelters, particularly those who are experiencing homelessness and that kind of thing. And those warnings are out throughout the area. But, you know, for a lot of people who might be caught off guard by this, kids going to school, people going to work, officials are just asking them to check the forecast before they leave, because as you said, this is definitely treacherous and painful if you get stuck in it in some way, guys.
Oof, Maggie, I hate hearing you say it's painful to be out there. And we're like, please continue standing there while I continue to ask you questions. But last one, I promise, this cold front is expected to last until tomorrow. But then I know it's coming back over the weekend. How's the city going to deal with this extreme weather for this extended period of time?
Yeah, we do have a little bit of break in between. I know that we have our forecast coming up, and that, you know, here in the Midwest, it seems to be a little bit of a reprieve in the middle, where temperatures are kind of going to get up into the 30s, even the 40s, and then back down into the teens. And, you know, again, they have the alerts out. They're asking people to take it slow, check the forecast, get inside into warming shelters if they need it. But, guys, I mean, just truth be told, this is Chicago. You know, people in Chicago, Minneapolis, these like hardened Midwest cities, they've been through this before. We've had a string of joggers. Can't go figure, coming behind our camera crew throughout the morning. So people are prepared and they're used to this, but it's still definitely worth heeding those warnings, guys.
I mean, you won't catch me jogging behind a camera crew even when it's sunny out. So
yeah, no kidding.
That's impressive.
Maggie, you haven't been there very long, but you seem like you're like a hardened. You're used to that city. You look totally chill out there. All right, Maggie, get inside. Thank you.
Literally chill. All right. Well, it's not just Chicago. 36 million people are under winter alerts this morning. For more on that, let's get a check at your Morning News Now weather.
Of course, it means Angie Lassman joins us. Hey, Angie.
Hey there, guys. Yeah, Maggie is exactly right. Millions of people are dealing with this bitter cold and not to mention the wintry mix that's making it really rough out there on those roadways. So let's start with the winter alerts. 35 million people included in this. Where you see the bright purple, pay special attention to that because those are ice storm warnings that have been in effect in places like Little Rock and Memphis. And here's why. You see the wintry mix working through, likely to see some ice accumulation throughout the next day or so here as we watch for multiple rounds of rain, snow, sleet to work through basically parts of the South over the next 48 hours. Here's how it plays out. This front continues to drag in colder air. We also see more moisture developing right along it. On the warmer part of it, you'll notice that it's rain, but a little farther into the north where we see the colder air in place, it's a mix of freezing rain and, of course, that snow as well. So we'll have multiple impacts when it comes with this ice accumulation as well as the flooding concern. And you can see that flooding will likely last into places in the south as we get into Wednesday and even Thursday as that heavy rain works through. So let's talk about the ice accumulation. It looks like the higher amounts, about 1/4 of an inch, maybe even 1/2 of an inch, are focused towards places like Texas, especially central Texas, Waco, Austin, all included in that where we can see some of those higher amounts. But again, we could see up to 1/2 an inch of ice accumulation on the roadways. This means damage for trees. It means power line issues. It means roadways are going to be really tough. And I want you to pay special attention to bridges, especially if you're in these areas that are going to deal with some freezing rain over the next couple of days. We know that the ground, of course, it keeps it from the ground keeps roads from cooling down as fast as the air temperature. But notice what happens with this air flowing underneath a bridge. It quickly speeds up that drop in temperature, and that means that we often see icing happening on bridges first. So that's why you see those signs leading up to the bridge. So just be careful on that. We saw multiple reports of that in parts of Texas yesterday, and we likely will see more of that here over the coming days. There's the rainfall amounts. Jackson, Mississippi, Shreveport, all included in those places where we could see the higher totals. And notice parts of Texas and into Louisiana. We do have a good chance that we could see some flooding concerns there. Again, Shreveport included in that, extending out towards Tyler. That's where we have a better chance of some flooding concerns through at least tomorrow and even into Thursday. Now, on to the cold. 19 million people impacted by these wind chill alerts. This is going to be something we'll deal with again through tomorrow. Those are the alerts that are up right now, and you can see why. -5 for what it feels like in Omaha right now. -10 for Bismarck. 34 below for the wind chill in Duluth. It is a day where either you stay inside or you have multiple layers. Even if you're in places like Little Rock and St. Louis, we're talking teens. As we get into the afternoon hours today, Shreveport ends up just 39 degrees, 23 in Oklahoma City. These numbers are well below normal for this time of year, so just be careful if you're going to be heading out and about, even into the south. Temperatures in Austin, even tomorrow, will not get out of the 30s. We will hit 37 degrees, again, well below normal for this time of year, so something to make note of. If you are in the Northeast and wondering where the cold air is, we've seen kind of a nice stretch to January as we wrap up this last day. We're going to continue to see a warm January go into the record books, but that doesn't last through the weekend. We'll see places like Boston, 26 degrees on Friday, ending up at 14 on Saturday. If you live in New York City, you'll wake up to single-digit temperatures in the morning hours of Saturday, so the Northeast is going to be included in this cold weather as well, ladies.
Oh, the Arctic surge always comes on a weekend.
Still no snow. What is going on? Also, I was really into your bridge animation. That was cool and really good to keep people safe. Give them some good info.
Now
Thanks,
you know.
Angie. Exactly.
Angie Lassman, thank you so much. And the double murder trial of Alex Murdaugh kicked off its second week with the jury getting a look inside Murdaugh's gun room from police body cam video, all as prosecutors brought his gun arsenal into the courtroom. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander has more.
Well, this is a trial that is bringing nationwide attention to the town of Walterboro, South Carolina. Day 6 of the trial saw 2 different agents take the stands and a back and forth over guns. In a South Carolina courtroom, a dramatic show and tell.
Let's see what else is in this box.
On the stand, investigator Jeff Croft revealing gun after gun found at the hunting property of Alec Murdaugh, the disbarred attorney on trial for the murder of his wife and adult son.
And again, if you can show that to the jury, please.
But the murder weapons have not been recovered, and Murdaugh's defense attorneys repeatedly objected to the guns being shown, saying ballistics tests had already determined these were not involved.
They're just not relevant, but sending, just weapon after weapon back into the jury room during jury deliberations, we think is unfairly prejudicial.
This agent gathered 12-gauge weapons for a reason, because 12-gauge rounds were used to murder Paul Murdaugh.
Jurors watched body camera video showing investigators searching Murdaugh's gun closet and recovering old shell casings from the property not involved in the murders. Jurors also heard recordings of an emotional Murdaugh, questioned by law enforcement several days after the killings. When asked about his wife, he breaks down.
I have a wonderful wife.
During that recording, Murdaugh also references a .300 blackout rifle, the same type of weapon investigators say was used in Maggie's death.
Do people often use .300 blackout to shoot hogs?
They do.
The day began with Murdaugh's attorneys suggesting because there were 2 weapons used, there may have been 2 different shooters.
One explanation, not the, but one.
Not the only.
Yeah, not the only one, but it is a reasonable explanation, just like one shooter running up that way, correct? Sure.
But the state pushed back on that, saying it could also mean there was one shooter using 2 different guns. Back to you.
Blaine Alexander, thank you so much.
And coming up on Morning News Now, a new chapter in New York City's migrant crisis.
Why many asylum seekers are now taking to the streets to protest their living conditions and what the city is saying about it. That's up next.
We're back with a new controversy in New York City's migrant crisis. This morning, some asylum seekers are waking up after spending the night on the street in a protest over the city's attempt to move them from a Manhattan hotel to a temporary shelter in Brooklyn. NBC News correspondent Valerie Castro spoke with some of the migrants.
The efforts to house migrants in New York City growing more chaotic as officials try to force some of them from this Manhattan hotel to a new shelter. The migrants protesting the move, instead sleeping on the street. Some of them say the conditions at the Brooklyn cruise ship terminal, which the city set up with 1,000 beds for single men, are unlivable, with reports from men who were there of only limited bathroom facilities.
We cross the street like this for take a shower and come back to this.
The city bused some people to the facility over the weekend, many who fled political turmoil and economic instability in Venezuela.
They feel safer sleeping in the streets rather than sleeping in what reminds them of an ICE detention center.
Several returned to Manhattan, warning others not to go, resulting in the sidewalk encampment under scaffolding.
Y a mí me toca desocupar mañana. Y me toca irme para allá, pero para allá no me voy porque de verdad eso no está apto para uno vivir allá.
But all of them will soon be forced to leave, the city saying the hotel will become a shelter strictly for families with children.
¿Qué te están diciendo? ¿Que se pueden quedar aquí o los van a mover?
Nos están dando, quiere que nos vayamos para Brooklyn para eso es como un campamento militar, algo bien feo.
Some of the men say they've been through constant displacement since leaving their home countries to being bused to New York from other states and now moving around various shelters or hotels. The city saying 42,000 asylum seekers have come here since last spring.
¿Cómo te sientes de toda la situación?
No, una cosa de loco, no pensé que esto me iba a pasar aquí. De verdad, y en este país tampoco.
The mayor's office in a statement saying, quote, "We continue to surpass our moral obligations," and insisting the Brooklyn site will provide the same services as other city-run relief centers. But local elected officials said in a joint statement their scheduled tour of the facility, supposed to be set up for the next 3 months, was postponed by the mayor's office, arguing if the shelter was ready for people to begin arriving Saturday, it should be ready for elected officials to visit on Monday. Despite the uncertainty, Ivan Pereira, who fled Venezuela, says he has faith.
¿Sabes dónde vas a dormir esta noche?
No. La verdad no tengo ni idea, ¿sabes? Solo tengo fe, yo tengo fe que esto se va a solucionar. No soy el único que está en esta situación. Pero bueno, les recuerdo que nosotros no vinimos de la selva, nosotros somos fuertes, somos guerreros, ¿verdad?
Now, in response, the city says there are adequate bathrooms both inside the terminal and in trailers that were hauled in. Specifically, we've been told there are as many as 90 toilets, but they would not specify the number of showers. The city also added that despite the controversy, there are people who have been staying at that shelter, but would not tell us exactly how many.
Definitely a story to watch. Big influx of migrants. Well, now to our international headlines. More deaths reported after the suicide bombing at a mosque in Pakistan yesterday.
NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Freyer joins us now from Beijing. Hey, Janice.
Hey, good morning. We begin in Pakistan and the fallout from that suicide bombing in Peshawar. The attack that happened inside a Sunni mosque at a police station left more than 90 people dead. Scores are injured, and rescuers are having to move huge mounds of debris to get at people who may be trapped. Now, there was a claim of responsibility by the Pakistani Taliban. They did so on Twitter, but authorities are not yet confirming who was behind the bombing. Tens of thousands of people are still affected by a powerful tropical storm in Madagascar. The storm made landfall last week with winds gusting to 105 miles per hour, unleashing torrential rain and landslides. Now, at least 30 people are reported dead, 20 are missing, and the water is still so high, most of the roads are unusable without canoes. And finally, it's a first for air travel. Emirates Airlines successfully flew a Boeing 777 with one of the engines powered by sustainable fuel. Now, they used a blend that apparently mirrors the quality of jet fuel. That includes fuel from a Wisconsin-based company made from plant-based sugars. Now, sustainable fuel is pricey. It costs about 3 times more than conventional jet fuel, but the idea and the long-term plan is to reduce the carbon footprint of the entire airline industry. And that's a look at your headlines this hour.
So impressive. Plant-based sugar.
Very, very cool. It's unfortunate to hear it's expensive. We'll have to see how that shakes out, but awesome.
Yeah, Janice Freyer, thank you so much.
Thank you. And coming up, just how big of a role does your manager at work play in your mental health, and how does it all translate to your life outside the office?
Plus, is raising a child actually a lot harder than people think? Many new parents seem to think so. We've got those stories and more in your weekly mental health check-in. After this, you're watching Morning News Now. We're back now with a new battle over education in Florida, this time at a small public liberal arts college in Sarasota. NBC News correspondent Maura Barrett tells us why critics are questioning Governor Ron DeSantis' picks for the school's new trustees.
At the new College of Florida's recent student meeting with new board members.
Article 3 is titled Religious. Should we, let's go to another person. I want to make sure that we get as many people as possible, but I'm happy to answer your question.
Tensions are running high as a student asked a follow-up question. Governor Ron DeSantis recently replaced 6 of the board's 13 members in an apparent bid to transform this intimate 700-person liberal arts college into what Florida's Commissioner of Education has touted as a Hillsdale of the South, referring to a private Christian university with explicit conservative views.
One of the things that makes teaching at New College a real privilege is that our students want to take risks.
New College's more flexible learning style and tight-knit LGBTQ-friendly community drew in second-year student Sam Scharf.
We came to New College for a reason, and they're trying to take that from us.
One of the new board members, Chris Rufo, told a New York Times columnist the board has plans to conduct a top-down restructuring and design a new core curriculum from scratch, including scrapping diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
You've called the instatement of the new board and what you're looking to do as a hostile takeover of the college. Why is the word hostile necessary?
Sure. I mean, it's a fact. Just here today, some anonymous activists sent a death threat to my fellow trustee, Eddie Spear.
Rufo told us the governor's, quote, political genius will be the new board's guiding light.
Anytime that you have a vision for transforming an institution, there will be conflict. I want to be very open and honest about that and transparent in the process. But beyond that conflict, I think, is academic excellence. It's world-class research.
Meanwhile, the governor's recent legislation restricting how lessons on race and gender are taught are currently blocked from being enforced in schools.
A federal judge calling the policy positively dystopian. What do you make of something that your efforts are surrounding as being described as dystopian?
Yeah, I obviously disagree, but what I would say is this. I've exposed in my reporting so many instances of kind of vicious racialist ideology, left-wing political activism under the guise of for so-called anti-bias training or DEI programming. And we're going to say left-wing political ideologies are no longer going to be administrative best practices. And that's not to say that right-wing political ideologies are going to be. We want to have a balanced system. We want to have more voices, more freedom, more expression, more robust exchange of ideas.
NBC News reached out to Governor DeSantis' office for comment, but have not heard back. It's a lot of attention for a state school on Florida's coast.
They targeted us first because we're a small school with a predominantly LGBT body, and a lot of other marginalized peoples go here.
Some students and faculty believe it's the governor's latest attempt to stoke national political tensions.
We very much do feel like political pawns in the greater culture war and our governor's national political ambitions and Rufo's careerist ambitions.
Politics shouldn't really be playing a big role in our education. What happens here is going to have implications for public colleges and private colleges and universities across the country,
leaving many students anxious and threatened about what could come next.
Our thanks to Maura Barrett for that report. And it's important to add that while both students and faculty do acknowledge that being part of the public school system does include state oversight, they also feel like political interests are reshaping public education in Florida.
Now it's time for our weekly mental health check-in. Today we're taking a closer look at the influence of managers and why some studies say they could impact your mental health actually more than your therapist.
Plus, new parents feel the job is much harder than they expected. We have more on how it's shaping their parenting styles.
Let's bring in Dr. Erica Richards for more. She's the chair of psychiatry at Sibley Memorial Hospital and an assistant professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins Medicine. Dr. Richards, it's always good to have you join us, and we just love this segment. Thanks for being with us today. So let's start with this new study. It's from the Workforce Institute, and it found that 69% of employees, that's a lot of people, feel like their manager has the greatest impact on their mental health. I guess this sort of makes sense, especially in this culture and society where, you know, so much of work is our identity. We spend so much time at work. But tell us how that stress translates into life outside the office, and also what can be done about it. What can a manager keep in mind?
Good morning, Savannah. So I think there's a couple of take-home points from this Workforce Institute survey. 3,400 people were questioned across 10 countries. So this is a universal concept. And what they believe is that it's really time for leaders to understand the impact that they're having on their organization and on the people that they're working with. I mean, when we're saying that our leaders have more of an impact than our doctors and our therapists, and really the same impact as partners, that's a big deal. And there's a couple of things that they want leaders to work on and to understand. Number one is leading by example. It's really important for leaders to really manage themselves. Don't take on extra work necessarily, spread it out amongst your team. Think about answering emails after hours on vacation and what kind of example you're setting for others, because they really will watch what you do. Emphasizing empathy is also important. Ask people how their day was. And listen, don't ask and then kind of walk down the hall. Really engage in what your employees are going through. And the last thing that they highlighted really is give people a reason to care. Remind them about the goals of the organization. Remind them about why you're working together.
A little goes a long way, especially when we spend so much time at work. And Dr. Richards, I want to ask you about another form of managing. You could maybe call it parenting, right? I know parenting is hard, but according to the Pew Research Center, actually 2/3 of parents are now saying the job is much harder than they thought it would be. So where exactly is the stress coming from? How are today's parents approaching the role compared to previous generations of parents? And also, do you have tips on how to relieve this stress, or are we kind of stuck in it as parents?
This is a very interesting study conducted by the Pew Research Center. And the good news is that they found about 80%, so 8 out of 10 people that they questioned find parenting enjoyable, find it rewarding, either most or all of the time. But about 2/3 also said it is much harder than they expected that it would be. And why is this the case? Well, if we highlight working moms or moms for a second, there's a lot that goes into that. What we know is that mothers today that may be working outside of the home, they're still spending the same amount of time with their children and with parenting. So figuring out how to balance that becomes stressful. I think that also parents in general are worrying, but they're worrying about different things. I think decades ago, the worries were, well, will my kid be kidnapped or will they get sick? But now we're seeing them worry about their child's mental health and trying to help them navigate that. They're worrying about financial stability. So there's just a shift and a change also to how they're interacting with their parents, with their children as parents, asking questions, really encouraging discussion more than a top-down approach with parenting.
Okay, I'm really into this last question, and maybe it's a way to address both of these two things that we're talking about, work stress, parenting stress. The UK they found that 90% of people who watch birds or listen to bird songs feel a boost in their mental health, a way to manage stress. Walk us through exactly what we know here.
It's very interesting, and this reminds me a little bit of a discussion we had a couple of months ago about the importance of smiling when you interact with people. Well, it's a very similar concept. The Royal Service for the Protection of Birds, established, in the UK, what they're seeing is that this is the importance of getting outside. Bird song, listening to the music, so to speak, of birds is really important for many people. Well, you do that outside. If you can't do that outside, certainly there are recordings that you can listen to, but incorporating a walk in a quiet area where you can really identify and hear the birds is important and something we can each do very frequently to help boost our own mental health.
Dr. Erica Richards, thank you so much. Like I said, we love this segment, and that's a good one. Now go listen to some birds chirp.
We're gonna go outside after this.
Hopefully it's warm enough where you live for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And coming up on Morning News Now, some new developments in that deadly movie set shooting involving actor Alec Baldwin.
Charges are set to be formally filed against Baldwin and the armorer for arrest today. We've got Danny Ceballos with us after the break with what happens next. Stick around. Today, the New Mexico District Attorney says it will file involuntary manslaughter charges against actor Alec Baldwin and the armorer for the film Rust for their part in the shooting death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins.
The DA first announced the charges against the two earlier this month. Since the shooting, both have maintained their innocence, with Baldwin's attorney slamming these latest charges as, quote, a miscarriage of justice. NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos joins us now to talk about this. So, Danny, the charges are set to be filed today, with prosecutors saying the two will be charged in the, quote, alternatives, what they're calling it. So talk to us about what exactly that means and what we can expect today.
Under the statute, there are two different theories of involuntary manslaughter. The first is doing a lawful act with what's called gross negligence. In criminal law, that basically means recklessness. The difference being that you're aware, conscious of the risk that you are undertaking. The other alternative is essentially a gun plus mere negligence. And mere negligence is just irrespective of what you thought in your head, you did something that fell below a standard of care. So in this case, the prosecution's electing to go under two different theories. And by the way, in interviews, prosecutor also said that when it comes to charging him as an executive producer or as an actor holding a gun, their answer was both. So prosecution's going with a lot of alternate theories here. I wonder how that's going to play out with the jury. If I'm defending the case, I point out, hey, prosecution hasn't even committed to a theory of responsibility here.
Danny, I actually want to ask a question sort of related to that. And first, read this statement. It's from the Actors Union, which is also sort of interesting. They put this statement out on Friday saying, quote, the prosecutor's contention that an actor has a duty to ensure the functional and mechanical operation of a firearm on a production set is wrong and uninformed. An actor's job is not to be a firearms or weapons expert. Couple questions here. So first of all, what does this mean coming from the Actors Union? Like, what kind of role do they play here? How much of an authority are they to say something like that? It sounds reasonable enough. But then what does that mean in terms of Baldwin's defense? Because it sounds reasonable enough, but then you bring in that producer question, which is what you just mentioned. And then what does that mean there?
I got to tell you, I've spoken to a ton of firearms and stunt experts, and frankly, they're all over the board on this issue. But here's what that statement by the Guild tells us. We already know that the FBI has issued a report. So the prosecutor, we can expect, will use experts to take the stand and say, based on my expertise, this was something, Baldwin's actions fell below the standard of care. They were reckless. But the fact that the Guild issues that statement tells us something very important. It means that the defense will be able to find an expert to say the opposite. And when that happens, a case becomes a battle of the experts. It's almost not about the underlying issues. It's about which expert the jury likes more, believes, and is able to digest their information better. It becomes a coin flip.
A coin flip. Everybody's watching. Danny Savalos, thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, there's a good chance you probably haven't seen it or even heard about the movie To Leslie until recently. The low-budget indie film flew mostly under the radar, but the movie star is now in the running for Best Actress at the Oscars. However, she made it into the category. She made it into the category is now at the center of an investigation. Our own Joe Fryer explains.
Tell me I'm good.
An Academy investigation is underway after this surprising Oscar nomination.
Andrea Riseborough in To Leslie.
Gasps could be heard after Andrea Riseborough was nominated for her performance in To Leslie, a drama about an alcoholic woman who wins the lottery.
Oh, well, I feel a hell of a lot better than yesterday.
The little-known indie movie has only grossed about $27,000 at the box office, and the film and Riseborough failed to get nominated for most other major awards, including the Golden Globes.
Despite your best effort, I ain't going nowhere.
But right before Oscars voting, a star-studded word-of-mouth campaign began to surface, with A-listers like Gwyneth Paltrow, Edward Norton, Sarah Paulson, and Demi Moore all promoting Riseborough's performance. Some even used the same language in their posts, almost all of them calling To Leslie a, quote, small film with a giant heart. Even the Best Actress frontrunner, Cate Blanchett, mentioned Riseborough during one of her recent acceptance speeches.
It is extremely arbitrary considering how many extraordinary performances there have been by women, not only in this room, but, you know, Andrea Riseborough and Tang Wei.
The actors wouldn't have done this for the most part if they didn't like the performance. So I don't want to take anything away from that. But to say this was organic and grew out of nothing is misunderstanding how Oscar campaigns work.
At issue, did the social media campaign violate the Academy's rules against lobbying for votes? In a statement, the Academy's Board of Governors announced that it's meeting Tuesday to review, quote, campaign procedures around this year's nominees to ensure that no guidelines were violated and to inform us whether changes to the guidelines may be needed in a new era of social media and digital communication.
The rules are the rules, and the way the rules are written right now is you are not allowed to excessively lobby people or disparage other campaigns.
Adding to the nomination's blowback, two black actresses who were heavily favored to score Best Actress nods were left out. The Woman King's Viola Davis.
Some things are worth fighting for.
And Till's Danielle Deadwyler.
This was my boy.
Riseborough herself even expressed shock, telling Deadline after the nominations, I'm not entirely sure how this happened.
He ain't never gonna speak to me again.
It is rare for the Academy to rescind a nomination. In 95 years, it has only happened 9 times.
I don't think that Andrea Riseborough will lose her nomination. And the most important thing is they will probably put a rule in place giving better guidance for what is okay and not okay on social media and to make outreach to people in the community during voting.
We reached out to Riseborough as well as her managers for comment, but did not hear back. Joe Fryer, NBC News.
All right, that is quite the talker, an interesting one for sure. We'll have to watch out for. Now, some financial headlines and some possibly exciting news for Apple fans.
That's right. CNBC's Pippa Stevens joins us now for more. Good morning, Pippa.
Good morning. A top and reliable tech analyst says Apple may launch a foldable iPad next year. He's not saying much about the details on the device other than it will feature a carbon fiber kickstand. He says there may be no new iPad releases this year, with a refreshed iPad mini likely in the first quarter of 2024. Apple has been rumored to be working on a foldable iPad since at least 2019. Meantime, a new price war may be brewing over electric vehicles. Ford is slashing the sticker price on the Mustang Mach-E as it ramps up production. The cuts range from as little as $600 to as much as $6,000. They bring 4 of the Mach-E models under the $55,000 price cap to qualify for federal tax credit under the Inflation Reduction Act. Ford's move is likely in response to Tesla's big price cuts earlier this month. And Boeing bids farewell to an iconic airplane today. The company is delivering the last 747 jumbo jet. Since debuting in 1969, the 747 has served as a cargo and commercial plane, as well as the Air Force One presidential aircraft. It also revolutionized international travel. But Boeing and rival Airbus have introduced more profitable and fuel-efficient wide-body planes with 2 engines versus 4 on the 747. Quite a legacy for that plane. Just looking at those photos, it is enormous.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Pippa, thank you so much.
And coming up, a harrowing story of survival that you have to see to believe.
After the break, one Colorado woman's treacherous 200-foot fall and the team of Good Samaritans who stepped in to save her life. That is up next.
We're back with a new bill inspired by a classic 90s sitcom. That's right, we're talking about Seinfeld. Fans of the show might remember a brief but very relatable interaction that Jerry had with a telemarketer. It was season 4. Now, state lawmakers in New Jersey are proposing the Seinfeld bill, which would require telemarketers to name what they're selling in 30 seconds. It also requires telemarketers to display their mailing address on any website they operate because, as Jerry Seinfeld points out, even telemarketers do not want people calling them at home. The bill would have to pass the full Senate and state assembly before making it to the governor's desk. Savannah, art, what is it? Art, reality, art.
Oh, yeah.
This is reality mimicking art right now.
There you go. I mean, hey, I like it. I get so many random calls, and I don't know what half of them are about, and it's like insurance on something I've never even owned, so love it.
Absolutely.
Let's go
we could
for
use
it.
this.
All right, thanks, Clay. Now, a Colorado woman is counting her blessings after falling 200 feet off a mountain in California and living to tell the tale. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson has her incredible story of survival.
The scenic beauty of California's San Gabriel Mountains conceals a hidden peril in plain sight: ice. And no one understands more than Ruth Warnecki.
To being out here again and walking in such a short amount of time is just extremely exciting.
The 40-year-old accomplished hiker says slippery terrain is nothing she isn't used to. So on Christmas Eve, she headed to the top of Cucamonga Peak, but on the way down, the wrong step of a lifetime.
For her to be alive I'd say that's a miracle.
Rescue workers say Ruth slipped and tumbled 200 feet, breaking her neck in 2 places.
With those types of falls over the last few years, they are usually fatalities.
Not Ruth. She doesn't even remember the fall. Instead, she woke up surrounded by a group of Good Samaritans, one sending a GPS locator to rescuers, another wrapping her up with the coat off her back.
I am just deeply, deeply grateful.
But that wasn't the tough part. High winds prevented the rescue chopper from reaching her location, so through indescribable pain and the possibility of permanent waist-down paralysis, Ruth had to complete the hardest hike of her life to reach a clearing for the rescue chopper.
You hiked those 150 feet?
I had hiked those 150
with
feet
a
out.
broken neck?
Yeah, well, I was trying to hold it like this.
Now, Ruth is on the long road to recovery. But despite the odds, she's walking it, guided by her faith.
To what I was saying about prayer, Jesus, now help me, be with me. And he brought me that sense of hope and comfort.
And it got you through.
Got me through.
The miracle on the mountain. Steve Patterson, NBC News.
Wow, such an incredible story of resilience and faith.
I'm speechless.
Yeah. Truly.
Hiking with a broken neck, avoiding paralysis, that's just amazing.
I'm so glad she's safe.
Yeah, so glad and amazing that those people helped her.
Absolutely, so many
That's
good
incredible.
stories on this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now. Stay with us.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.